We're very pleased to have such a broad audience joining us again today. We have 14 countries joining, and it's our tradition to read off what countries are connected live. Those countries, which will be read alphabetically, so I'm not taking sides at all, include Australia, Canada, France, Germany, India, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway, Slovenia, Sweden, of course Switzerland, United Kingdom, United States, and Uruguay. So yet again, we have a broad connection base today, and we're so pleased for that. It's been a delight seeing such a global community come together with this. Our vision of what we're doing here is to build a global Jungian community, and we've had now 15 seminars that have gone very well. They seem to be expanding, growing larger. Our vision of community involves connecting in 5 ways or so. One is the live seminars, and you'll notice today we're having a live seminar that people around the world are connected to. Option number 2 is a recorded seminar. We hold these on Fridays to balance the university schedule. That means a lot of people are working and can't make it, so we'll have a 3-week window that people are able to watch the video recorded. Number 3 are DVDs that we have available. That takes around 2 to 3 months to get back from the publisher, but people can order a permanent copy of a DVD if desired. 4th is social media. We've really tried to grow our social media piece. That includes Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, blogging, a number of ways. And if you go to our website, you'll see a growing internet discussion presence. And it's nice to see some active dialogue back and forth with that. That's been a great part of it. And lastly is the blog. We do have a weekly or so blog that we send out that we try to have some original content available to people via the internet. I'd like to say a few thank yous before we get going. Of course, a large thank you to UNCA Asheville, the University of North Carolina, Asheville. They are our technological host today, so they're the ones behind the scenes that have organized this for us. We're using their equipment. I'm sitting in UNCA right now in their video conference center, and we want to thank both the Department of Psychology as well as the Distance Learning Center for their wonderful help in allowing this to occur. Number 2 is ISAP Zurich, which is the International School of Analytical Psychology, Zurich. They have been a wonderful partner with us in this. They've allowed many of their analysts to lecture to us and really supported us through this. And we really want to thank ISAP Zurich for their continued support. Next is Sonoma State University, where Tom Singer and Laurel McCabe are today, and they've partnered up with us as well to try to help with some content and a connection, ongoing site with them. I'd like to mention briefly Spring Journal Books. They've been a strategic partner with us, have helped with some marketing efforts. They also have worked quite a bit with ISAP Zurich. They have their Zurich lecture series coming up. Here it's in a absolutely beautiful building in Zurich, and I'm told if you can get out there, it's a wonderful experience. There's also, of course, Jungian Odyssey, which Murray might talk about later, but that's I believe, June yearly conference that is wonderful as well. ARAS, A-R-A-S, which is the Archived Research in Archetypal Symbolism, is a site to be aware of. They have 17,000 archetypal images that you can access via the web, and they have a new book coming out called The Book of Symbols, Reflection on Archetypal Images. And lastly, just the Philmon Foundation I would highlight, as they've been so instrumental both in the Red Book and other Jungian publications coming forth, and particularly the works of C.G. Jung to be continued to be published out. A few brief housekeeping notes I'd like to say before we turn over the microphone. One is I'd like to remind people that we are indeed recording today's seminar, so that if you ask a question directly into the cameras, your image and voice will be recorded on the DVD. Most people seem to be fine with that, but if you're not, just hand the question to myself or the other moderators, and we can ask your question if you'd rather not be on the DVD per se. Remember, we have over 100 plus people joining us today around the world. We'll be asking for emailed questions from the web stream sites. You already have that address, but it's info@AshevilleYoungCenter.org, Asheville@AshevilleYoungCenter, all one word, .org, O-R-G. And feel free to send us email questions, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can from the presenters, but realize with so many people, we'll get to some of those, but potentially not all of them. Please turn off cell phones, particularly if you're at the group sites, or turn them to vibration. Our seminar today is 3 hours in duration with a 10 to 15 minute break halfway through. And if you do need to get up from one of the group sites, feel free to quietly exit out the back doors. So let me introduce Murray and Andreas. Dr. Murray Stein is the current president of ISAP Zurich, which we mentioned earlier. Murray has done quite a few of our seminars. He's our main anchor and has really done some marvelous jobs with that. He's the former president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology. He's also a founding member of 2 separate Jungian institutes. He has just published a wonderful text called Jungian Analysis. He's the chief editor for this text. It's really one of the primary texts within Jungian analysis, and he has coordinated some of the world's leading analysts to author chapters of this book. Came out a few months ago, so if you get a chance, it's really a marvelous text. Dr. Andreas Schweitzer is a practicing Jungian analyst as well in the Zurich community with ISAP. He's extensively studied in theology as well as Egyptology, which is particularly pertinent for today's talk. He has been the president of the Eranos Conference for the last 10 years and is currently president of the Psychology Club, which was founded in 1916 by Carl Jung himself. And he has also published some texts, including the one that will be based off today, which is the Sun God's Journey Through the Neverworld, reading of the ancient Egyptian Amduat. And if you get a chance, the book will go in a lot more detail to some of the themes he's talking about today. Both books are available on Amazon.com or wherever you would purchase your books. So without further ado, I'd like to transfer over to Dr. Murray Stein and Dr. Andreas Schweitzer. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, coming across very well.
Okay. Well, I'm very pleased to be here today with Andreas Schweitzer, my friend and colleague at ISAP in Zurich. And really the idea for this video seminar is the result of his recently published book, recently published in English, in its English translation, The Sun God's Journey Through the Netherworld, Reading the Ancient Egyptian Amduat. And this was actually published about 10 years ago in German, now in a beautiful English translation by Cornell University Press. And I read this book several months ago, and I wrote a review of it for Spring Journal Books, which should be appearing shortly. And I was very impressed with the depth of understanding and scholarship that Andreas brings to this subject. And so I'm very pleased that he'll be here with us today in this seminar to speak about his researches and his interpretations and understanding of this really very important and interesting ancient Egyptian text. I'm going to introduce the seminar. I'll speak for about 20 or 30 minutes. We can have some time for questions. My comments will be of a general nature, and then I'll turn the seminar over to Andreas, and he will carry on from there. And after a period of time, we'll have a break, and then come back, and there will be opportunity for questions, for discussion. And I hope you do participate as fully as you can from your various locations. Ask us questions as they arise, and we'll try our best from our side to respond to your questions and comments. We titled this Symbols of Individuation in Myth and Religion. And I should say that the study of myth and religion is a part of Jungian studies and has been since the very beginning, since its founding, when Jung began doing his researches and writings. One of his first major works deals extensively with religion and mythology. In English it's called Symbols of Transformation nowadays. It was in the first writing published in 1911, 1912, Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, Transformations and Symbols of the Libido. It was partially a case study, but a very deep penetration and exploration of world mythology, world religion. Jung became really fascinated by all of this type of material as he engaged in his researches, and went very deeply into a kind of academic study. But that was then followed by a very personal, existential engagement with mythological images and materials. And that is now known as the Red Book period. We've had a couple of seminars on the Red Book. And in that period, following his publication of the more academic work, more scientific work, Jung went into another modality in order to investigate himself, investigate his own psyche, and penetrate below the surface and get behind the scenes into the deeper layers of the psyche. And you can see appearing in his Red Book images and the narratives, the stories that he describes there, his experiences in active imagination. You can see quite a few of the characters and themes that he dealt with in a more academic way in the previous work. The way I look on this is that he, or his psyche, made a selection of all those studies that he did, Mithraic symbolism, for example, Hindu philosophy, Egyptian imagery and religion, Gnosticism, Christianity, Judaism, many subjects that he covers in a more academic way in the earlier work, now reappear in the Red Book in a very personal way in which he engages the figures, he dialogues with them, and he attempts to understand their psychological meaning from his own standpoint as a 20th century man. And why are they still important to him? Why do they still matter after so many thousands of years? Why isn't that just dead history? Why is it still living in his soul? Those are the kinds of questions he asks, and he comments on them in the text of the Red Book. What he says in Memories, Dreams, Reflections is that after he finished that book, the more academic book, Symbols of Libido, he asked himself the question, and it was a very unsettling question. He said to himself, well, what is your myth? He said to himself, what is my myth? What myth do I live in? Having studied the myth of traditional peoples from all over the world, what is my myth? And he said that question became very uncomfortable for him because he couldn't answer it. He didn't know what his myth was at that point. And he started asking himself, why does it matter to even have a myth? Don't we live in Enlightenment times? Is myth still important to us? What does myth mean? Why have a myth? But the more uncomfortable question was, I don't have one, because he had not really, you could say, integrated or taken into himself the Christian story, narrative, mythology deeply into himself at that point. I think he does that in the course of the Red Book. He gets very deeply engaged in the Christian mythos, the crucifixion, identification with Christ, all kinds of themes and materials that penetrate into the Red Book material from his Christian background. But it was really a very different kind of engagement from the distant, more academic, scholarly view. Now, we and he live in a period of history, Western history, that is called modernity. And modernity is a word for a kind of attitude toward life, particularly toward religion, toward understanding the world and how it works, that is the historical evolutionary stage of consciousness reached by Western Europeans, North Americans now, as well, following the Protestant Reformation in Europe, following humanism, following the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment and the Age of Science, the Age of Skepticism, in which the truths of religion were challenged. Theology was no longer accepted at face value. The Bible was investigated by scholars and found to be not a single text from a from a transcendent voice. Actually, it has a history. There are many pieces to the text. It was put together in history by many different authors. And so this uncovering of what it seemed like a perfectly woven fabric of transcendent truths in the dogmas of the Christian religion just came unwoven. And modern people investigated, using their rationality, investigated the truths of religion, the claims of mythology, the images and so on, standing outside of them, picking them apart, looking at their history. Very different attitude from living within a myth. And so, as a consequence of that development, modern people live without a myth. They live outside of myth. They might entertain myth as a kind of entertainment. You know, you can read myths and stories, and you look at them as interesting fairy tales, so on and so forth. But it's a bit like going to the movies. They're entertaining for a little while, and then you put them down, you go about your business, about your life. They don't carry the weight of conviction. They don't orient life. They don't create values. They are dead on the page, in a sense, if you don't read them deeply, if you don't read them in a certain way. But simply as texts for scholarship, they're like any other texts of history. So living without a myth, in modernity, is really a novel cultural experience. The first time in the history of the world of people in large numbers lived outside of mythical, a commonly accepted mythical tradition. Explicit myth. Now we have implicit myth, and we can look at that, the kind of myths that nationalism creates myths. You know, there is the American myth, there is the Russian myth, the Swiss myth, and so on. And people do semi-consciously live within these mythologies and ideologies and so on, but it's quite different from living within a religious mythos. Now, what happens when people are without a myth? There's a particular kind of psychological problem that develops. That's the problem of modernity, where people have a lot of angst. They have a lot of anxiety about the meaning of life. They are without essential orientation and direction other than the practical, making a living, consuming beautiful things, trying to get rich, trying to get comfortable, trying to survive, going to the doctor, all those sort of practical everyday things that we're all engaged in take up most of our time. But they don't really add up to a sense of meaning of life. And how does one orient one's life? And one isn't contained. In modernity, one is uncontained. One is without a rudder. And so Jung often speaks about this problem of modernity, modern man in search of his soul. It's a kind of soulless, mythless, empty, materialistic lifestyle that we live, many of us. Of course, people still live within their religions and their religious traditions, the fundamentalists of all kinds all over the world today. But modernity is a particular kind of attitude that people in Western Europe, enlightened and educated classes particularly, those who no longer participate in religions, traditions, live in a world devoid of mythological image and conviction. And Jung felt the suffering of this state very keenly. When he said, "What myth do I live? Do I have a myth?" and couldn't answer the question, he really felt some anguish. He felt that he was missing something, not just a kind of casual, accoutrement of life that we might have or not have, but something really at the core of human existence was absent. And so he went in search of his soul, as he says at the beginning of the Red Book. He called out, "Oh, soul, where are you?" And in the course of the Red Book and reflections on the Red Book, as he says in his autobiography, he was able to put together, using a lot of traditional materials that he had learned from books and studying, but in a very particular, very personal way, through the use of active imagination and incorporating some of his dreams, he was able to put together a kind of cosmography for himself. And what he created was the great mandala that you find in the appendix of the Red Book, which really is a cosmograph that describes a cosmology. It's a worldview. And that became his container. And I would say for the rest of his life, he was faithful and loyal to his myth. He felt contained by it. It oriented him. He wouldn't give an inch on it. When he got into arguments with Victor White about the dark side of God and so on, is God all good, or is there a dark side of God? He would not even discuss the subject, because he knew that God had a dark side based on his own experiences. And you can read about that in the Red Book, and it's clear as day in the 7 Sermons to the Dead. That's a part of the scrutinies. It's in the cosmography and the cosmology that he created in the mandala. He stood on it. He was contained by it, and that was his article of faith. He would later give it psychological language, the self, and so on, psychological terminology, but it was backed up by mythological images and processes and experiences that he had really undertaken and experienced for himself. So that he did forge a container for himself. He forged his own personal religion, if you will, out of these experiences. But within those experiences, there are a lot of traditional materials. So he went back, in a sense, to go forward. He went back into the dead past, as Andreas Schweitzer writes about so beautifully in his book. To experience a rebirth, you have to go back into the dead corpse before you can go forward into a new birth and into a new life. And that's exactly what Jung does in that Red Book experience. So what is the importance of myth? It contains, it orients, and it provides a sense of transcendent meaning, something beyond the everyday, something beyond. You know, we all live with some sense of meaning. We take care of our children, we want to get an education, we want to live well. All of that provides meaning. Our relationships, our friends and colleagues, and especially family, all provides meaning. But not transcendent meaning. Transcendent meaning only comes from an experience of the transcendent, which people have traditionally found within the religious traditions, and still do find within the religious traditions. I was in Russia last week, went into a church, and I saw people worshiping icons, and with great conviction, with tears running down their eyes, with prayers that they knew would be answered and heard on the other side. The icon is a kind of window into eternity. So it isn't that people no longer find the transcendent within traditional religions. They certainly do, if the religions work for them. But the modern man, the modern woman, finds that they can't believe in the religions. The religions are only mythologies. They're dead on the page. They're stories that don't matter anymore. And in postmodernity, there's a kind of playfulness about myth. You know, you can find or imagine mythical structures all over the place. In modern life, look through the magazines. You see Aphrodite. I was looking at a magazine on the tram today. Aphrodite's on every page. Beautiful women dressed scantily, playing with men, and there you are. You have Greek mythology in modern times, but we don't really take it all that seriously. There's no temple to Aphrodite in Switzerland that I know of. I'd go there if there was. Nancy Qualls wrote a wonderful book, Sacred Prostitute, some 20 years ago, and she describes the temples of Aphrodite in Greece. There was real worship going on there. There was a sense of the transcendent. It wasn't just sexual enticement. There was something beyond the sensual that came through the sensual and that was experienced. Now, having said something about what myths do in the way of giving meaning and orientation, I'd like to go on to why we study myths in Jungian psychology. There's another reason. We don't study myths so much to get into them and find our personal life's meaning in myths. If we study Egyptian mythology or Greek mythology or Hindu mythology, whatever. Um, or, and in our training programs, we study all kinds of mythologies. We have a department at ISEP called Psychology and Religion. We have exams on mythology. We encourage students to pick a mythology and study it thoroughly, pick a religion, religious theme, study them, and as many as they can from all over the world. What Jung said when he set up or helped to develop the training program at the Jung Institute in 1948 when it was founded, and students asked him, why don't we study more case material? Why don't you give us some cases? He said, well, every case is different. And you should treat every person you see as an individual. If you get cases, you get one case. If you study mythology and you study the religions, the themes, the motifs, it's like studying a general anatomy that applies to people everywhere. This is a kind of universal, impersonal psychology. You find patterns that are lived worldwide by people because of their cultures and their psychological makeup and their attunement with the collective unconscious and so on. And these are basic structures, so you can understand anybody's psychology, no matter who it is, and understand it in a particular way, once you have the understanding of these general patterns. So the idea is that the mythologies of the world contain motifs, fundamental motifs, patterns of imagination, behavior, thought, feeling, that belong to the human as such. They are a part of anthropology. In a general sense, it is the human as such that we're studying. And the term he used for that was the collective unconscious. You were studying the patterns of the collective unconscious, which are universal, archetypal. An archetype is a universal pattern. In order to establish that something is an archetype, you have to be able to find it everywhere, in everybody. That's its very definition. Archetype is below the personal. It's greater, more general than the personal. It's impersonal. And it's like inheriting your genetic makeup, your brain structures and so on, the basic things that come to you as a gift from your genetic inheritance and your cultural inheritance. Cultures also pass these general patterns. They don't all come from your genes, but they come through culture and as well. And so you pick them up and you unconsciously live them. You live these patterns, and your psyche selects various versions and combinations of the patterns. And then when you go to a Jungian analyst and you delve into your psyche a bit and you study yourself and you look at your dreams and so on, you begin to discover which of the basic archetypal patterns belong more to you, which belong more to your mother, your father, your sister, and so on. And you get a glimpse into your own basic structures. But of course, everybody's life experience is different. Everybody has different personal associations to their dreams and to their images and experiences. And so there are levels of the psyche. There's the personal level, and there's the level of the complexes, the personal unconscious, as Jung called it, and then there's the level of the collective unconscious. And so by studying mythology, we get into those more general levels. Freud was also interested in these universals. He found one, the Oedipus complex, said that everybody had one. Maybe everybody does, it's unclear, but that was his single contribution to the study of archetypes. He said the Oedipus complex. Jung felt that all the complexes, and there's more than one, all the complexes have an archetypal core to them, and so there's a kind of multiplicity of patterns. If you read Jung and Jungian psychology, you'll find many patterns spoken about, not just one. Jean Bolin, some years ago, wrote a very successful book, I think a very well done book on Greek mythology called Goddesses in Every Woman, and a sequel to it, Gods in Every Man. And she took the Greek images of the gods and goddesses and described these patterns, and a lot of people could relate to them and say, oh, I'm more an Artemis than I am a Hera, the virginal rather than the wife, and so on. And so these patterns, while they belong to culture, and Greek culture in particular, in their core, the motifs, the basic underlying motifs, do describe basic human attitudes and types. And if you go even further below all of that, as Marie-Louise von Franz once said, there's only one archetype, one basic archetype, not the Oedipus archetype, but what we call the self. That is the source of all the archetypal structures. And they're all unfoldings of this basic creative center that we all participate in and we all have access to through our own psychic life. In addition to the archetypal images that we find in mythology, we find archetypal processes. And if anything, these are even more important than the images. The images can be quite particular, quite interesting, but in many cultures, to us, they seem bizarre. To people in those cultures, ours seem a bit bizarre and strange, hard to understand. But the processes that you find in mythology, the typical processes of development and unfolding, really are much more identifiable. If you say the process of what the hero does, the specific hero, whether it's Gilgamesh or it's Hercules or whoever, the specifics are quite different, the way they look and the way they act. But the processes that they go through and what they represent and the kinds of things they do and how they develop, those things are much more identifiable as universals. And so it's the motifs, really, the motifs of the images and the processes that we identify as archetypal. And one of those is the process of individuation itself. The individuation process as a developmental process within the human psyche, we can argue, is a universal archetypal process that unfolds with all the particularities of culture and individual differences, but nevertheless the underlying themes, the underlying process from birth through childhood into adulthood and into old age, those developments on a psychological level, on an inner level, and the movement toward ego development, and then a spiritual stage in the second half of life toward spiritual development and wisdom and so on. Those you can find cross-culturally and throughout the world. So that's what we identify as archetypal. Now, how do individuals connect to the archetypal? In modernity, that's hard. If you live in a traditional culture or you participate in a traditional religion with conviction, you would find contact to archetypal images and energies and numinous experience and so on in the tradition itself. The tradition contains archetypal material, and that's why Jung said religions are containers, and they're therapeutic. They help people feel contained within the larger collective psyche. But if you're outside of the traditions, if you're a modern person, and those no longer speak to you, those no longer carry very much conviction for you, how do you find access to the archetypal level of the psyche? Well, Jung devised a method. It's called amplification. You take your dreams and you look at your dreams and you see how do your dreams and the motifs in your dreams, the figures in your dreams, connect to archetypal processes and figures. And so by amplifying your dreams, you begin to get a sense that you also participate in a level of unfolding and development that has its source in the collective unconscious, that you also are connected through your dream life, through your active imaginations perhaps, if you engage in those processes, that you also connect to the mythological, to the archetypal. And by doing that, you slowly develop, as Lionel Corbett has written about beautifully in a couple of books, your own kind of personal religious worldview. Using dreams and active imagination like Jung did, you can personalize religion and spirituality, and you come to your own particular version of what religions have held up for the masses, for multitudes of people, for the collective. So we live in the age of the individual now in modernity, and we expect individuals to be responsible for their own spiritual development. Previously, one could just say, well, go to the tradition, find yourself a good teacher, go to the guru, go to the priest, and they will help you. And now we look to the individual to delve into their own unconscious material, whether in analysis or on their own, self-analysis. Usually better if you do it with some help. And over time, following carefully your dreams and your inner processes, you will also find what myth can provide, a sense of containment, orientation, and meaning that transcends simply the everyday meanings that we all need and we enjoy through our practical life and our relationships. So that's what I want to say about, in a very general way, about myth and religion in relation to Jungian psychology. And I'm going to just take a few questions now, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we will shift to a very interesting and deep look at a particular ancient religion and mythological system, the Egyptian. So if, Steve, if you want to come on and field a couple of questions, we could do that. If there are no questions at this point, we'll just go ahead.
Yes, that sounds good. And I'm told that we have quite a few online watching right now. We should have UNC Wilmington is present as well, although there's probably a small contingency there. Let me start with Sonoma. Tom and Laurel, are you guys there? And are there some questions so far for Murray?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Good morning. Well, just one brief comment first. That was an absolutely beautiful presentation by Murray. It was just an elegant, one of the best descriptions of the function of mythology that I've ever heard. So thank you very much, Murray. Are there questions here? Does anybody have a question yet? Maybe nobody has a myth here yet.
Keep working on it, California.
We'll get back to you in an hour.
Okay.
We're lost in the postmodern out here.
Well, let's go to Asheville. We have a question here. So go ahead, Asheville. Question.
Yeah, I wonder if you'd say something about the role of the natural world as a container.
If I would say something about the natural world as a container, I think some people do find in nature something close to the mythological. I think that's a very special feeling. Now, nature, I think for almost everybody, if you go out in nature, you feel connected to something larger than yourself, and both positive and negative. It can be very destructive. It can be very beautiful. Right today, we've had a beautiful fall day in Switzerland, but I know that can change tomorrow. So nature has the quality of being both terrifying and threatening, as well as very inviting and receptive. And of course, onto nature has been projected, we say, from a psychological point of view, all kinds of mythological content. For instance, in our time, there's a new mythology being put together, I guess, or is emerging, some way called Gaia, the Gaia principle. You can read about that in New Age books quite a lot. And it's the earth as alive, the earth as sensitive, the earth as a living, breathing, organic being with strong feelings about things. And if we behave ourselves and we are ecological, maybe she'll be better to us. If we disturb her too much and poke around and create a big mess on the planet, we will be punished and destroyed. So you get... And people have very strong feelings about that. I remember some years ago, a young person coming to my door, lived in Illinois, and they were collecting money for a green organization, Greenpeace, I think it was. And I asked this young person, 16 years old, out at night doing this work, why are you doing this? I was curious what motivated him. And he said, well, just look around you. And he pointed to the trees outside he said, "Can't you see they're suffering?" And he and I stood there and we both practically wept. I mean, he had very strong feelings for what was happening to Mother Nature. And out of that kind of feeling and of course, the awesomeness of nature and the numinosity of experiences in nature, there is a ground for a mythological experience. Now, that has also oriented people. It's given their life meaning to create parks and to create beauty in nature and to preserve nature. So it does have some of the functions of myth. My problem with nature as such is, well, I can't really say that. The experience of transcendence, but certainly in nature and with natural objects, like the sea, like mountains, there probably was a reason why the Greeks put all their gods on mountains and other people. One does experience the transcendent within some of those contexts. And so if nature can take you to the transcendent and give you an experience of the numinous and give your life some order and meaning and containment, I would say it's working in the fashion of mythologies, yes. Well, I think I'm going to thank you for that question, and I think that moves very nicely into the next phase of our seminar, because in his book also Andreas does write a lot about nature and about the connection between nature and spirit. And I want to just say a few words to introduce him. Steve already did introduce him. Andreas Schweitzer is a friend of mine and a colleague. He's a very, very highly respected senior analyst in Zurich. He was trained at the Jung Institute, graduated in the 1970s. And I would say one of his main teachers, who was living at the time I trained there and was very active in the time he trained there, was Mary Louise von Franz, who was probably the greatest of all of Jung's followers and teachers, a brilliant analyst and researcher and thinker. And Andreas Schweitzer was close to her and her work and knows it extremely well. In the last couple of years, he's accepted the presidency of the Psychological Club, the oldest existing Jungian institution in the world, founded in 1916 by Jung himself and a few of his cohorts at that time. And it will celebrate its 100th birthday in a few years. So Andreas is very busy with renovating the building and getting it set up for their big birthday in 2016. Well, he's written this book, The Sun God's Journey Through the Netherworld, and has done a lot of research on Egyptian mythology, and I'm going to turn the camera over to you now, Andreas, and let you tell us about your work.
Thank you, Murray. You tell me when we should make a break.
Yeah,
Okay. Hello all together. In 1937, Jung was invited to the Terry Lectures at the Yale University, and what he presented there was the most elaborate and profound analysis of the interrelationship between psychology and religion. Murray talked a lot about it already. And at the end of these lectures, Jung said, you can say, for instance, that life is a disease that goes on with a very bad prognosis. It lingers on for years only to end with death. But you can also say it was a grace of God. Then Jung continues to talk about the neurosis of modern man. That's what I would call this tragic inner split between the creative spirit of the unconscious and consciousness, saying that only a religious experience can heal this split or this neurosis. This experience of spiritual adventure is an encounter with the undefined or indefinable. But, says Jung, there are, I quote, good reasons for thinking that even the boundless is pervaded by psychic laws which no man invented but of which he has gnosis. Meaning there is an inner order, and Murray talked about before, when he talked about the myth as giving an orientation, meaning that this inner order that you can trust even in the worst chaos of your life, you cannot understand it, but you can experience it, and thus you have gnosis. I deeply agree with Jung that even the boundless is pervaded by psychic archetypal laws which no man invented, of which, however, we can have gnosis. This secret order, we may speak of an inner order, which is so typical for the spirituality of natural man, that refers to the last question from you. We can say that this secret order is beautifully illustrated by the text and images that I will present you today. It's the oldest of the Egyptian books of the netherworld, the Amduat, which literally means that which is in the netherworld. The Amduat dates from the beginning of the New Kingdom, that is 1500 before our era. We find its text and illustrations on the walls of the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings in Upper Egypt. The book describes Re's journey through the netherworld, and with him all the deities and blessed dead traveling in the bark through the 12 hours of the night. I can give you today but a small glimpse of the richness and beauty and wisdom of this unique document. Marie-Louise von Franz, and she did this for good reasons, as I believe, she once called it an initial dream of humankind. The Amduat presents us an initial dream of humankind. This is to say that the transformation process of the sun god, his night sea journey, as presented in the Amduat, anticipates the major stages of developing consciousness throughout the dawning millennia. There is a beautiful little story about Jung's stay, referring to Jung's stay in Egypt. That was after his expedition to Africa. He stayed 1 month in Egypt. When Jung once remarked to a sheikh that it is striking that the Egyptians had no good houses for their lifetime, but they would spend all their energy for building up the tombs for the afterlife, then Jung said, then the Arab just smiled and said and replied, well, why should we bother about building up houses for 70 years or so? It's far more important to build a house for your life in eternity. And you see, that's what I like so much with Egypt. It's exactly what I would call to work on the inner temple, on an inner house. And that is what we do when we work on our dreams and when we do our active imagination on a continuous basis. Obviously, this sheikh still had the deep trust of the ancient Egyptians in the afterlife. One cannot say that the Egyptians considered the earthly life as a disease. For them, however, it certainly was merely a preliminary stage of the real life after death. Does it work?
Okay.
Sorry?
Okay, it's on.
Okay, we forgot. What I want to, can you see it? I hope you can see it. Can you see the text of the pyramid?
Yes, we can. It's coming across right here.
That's good.
Thank you.
So what you see here is the oldest chamber of the pyramid of King Venice or Unas, dated as early as the end of the 3rd millennia before our era. That is about 2300 before Christ. And you see, suddenly from one generation to the other, we will find all these beautiful texts covering the wall around the sarcophagus of the dead pharaoh. That is one of those archetypal shifts that Jung often talks about. And now in one of these magical spells, we can read, O Osiris the king, that is the deceased pharaoh, and in later times, every deceased, you have gone, but you will return. You have slept, but you will awaken. You have died, but you will live. He who is asleep resembles the dead. Waking in the morning is waking from death. For sleep is obviously a healing process, even a process of regeneration and renewal in the darkness of the night. Similarly, the dead awakens to life. Now the beauty and richness, as well as the threat and darkness of all the text and illustration that I will show you today, is in terms of psychology a projection of the objective psyche onto the images of the netherworld. A projection of the objective psyche onto these images. The tremendous effort they made, the Egyptians, for the beyond is the most careful and elaborate consideration of what we call today the objective psyche. It reflects a religious approach of the unknown, not unlike our dream work and active imagination. So no wonder, therefore, that we find the most striking parallels between the 3,500 years old images and, for instance, Murray already talked about it, the images of the recent published book, Red Book. I will give you only one example. What you see here is the sunbark as seen by C.G. Jung. And listen to the beautiful text in the Red Book. A text about the rising sun. He who sleeps in the grave of millennia dreams a wonderful dream. He dreams a primordially ancient dream. He dreams of the rising sun. He who comprehends the darkness in himself, to him the light is near. That is so true. Whoever comprehends the darkness in himself, to him the light is near. He who descends to the darkness reaches the dawn of the life-giving light. And he ends this passage with jubilation, exultant longings, tears meet towards the zenith. So let us now visit one of those graves of millennia. Let us have a look at this primordial dream that we find so beautifully illustrated by the books of the netherworld in the royal tombs of Upper Egypt. Let us descend into the darkness of the netherworld, which alone can give birth to the new light. At the very end of the Valley of the Kings that you see here, at the edge of the Theban mountains that separates the endless desert from the Nile Valley, so the Valley of the King would be behind the ridge that you see in the background in the desert of this picture. At the very end of this valley, we find the tomb of the mighty pharaoh Thutmose III. It is my favorite tomb, containing what I consider the most fascinating copy of the Amduat along the walls of its oval burial chamber. From the New Kingdom onward, that is, as I told you, 1500 before our era, the pharaohs were no longer buried in the monumental pyramids of Lower Egypt, but in the rock-cut tombs of the Theban Valley of the Kings. Here we look from the once carefully hidden entrance of the tomb of Thutmose III into the valley. The tombs are cut deeply into the rock with huge sloping corridors sometimes leading more than 100 meters, that is some 300 feet, into the earth to the final burial chamber. This is a drawing of Belzoni, the excavator of one of the biggest trees and most impressive tombs in the Valley of the Kings. It shows the entrance of the tomb of Seti I in its original state. The halls and various rooms are often amazingly rich decorated. For thousands of years, they were carefully protected, but since they are open to the public, they gradually deteriorate. In fact, within 2 or 3 generations. Today you can hardly see any remains of the originally so beautiful colors. Fortunately, for reason of security, this tomb is closed since many years. We now turn back to the tomb of Thutmose III. I cannot go into the symbolic meaning of all the architectural details of these tombs, which are in fact very telling and very interesting. However, descending along the corridors from room 1 to 2 to 3 here, we gradually cross the threshold leading from this world to the other world, the realm of transformation from death to life. The next picture will be taken in room 3, close to the pillar to the sarcophagus. And that is what you see. We look here to the burial chamber with the sarcophagus surrounded by the 12 hours of the Amduat. We have to read the text from left to right, like a book, and doing so we accompany the sun god Re and the crew of his bark on their eventful, often dangerous journey through the 12 hours of the netherworld. The middle register here of the 11th hour begins always with the sun god. You may see the sun bark traveling in his boat along the river of the netherworld. The scene in this middle register, as a rule, represents, as we shall see later, the central topic of the respective hour. And more than 900 goddess, deities, and blessed dead dwell on the 2 riverbanks. We call it the upper and the lower register. Whenever the great god passes, they become alive, praise, adore, and honor him, and also protect him from his omnipresent enemies. On his journey through the netherworld, the sun god experiences a profound process of physical and cognitive transformation, culminating in his rebirth at the dawn of a new day at the end of the 12th hour. The Egyptians were deeply convinced that whoever knows of this mysterious process, as recorded in the decoration of the tombs, will participate in the transfiguration from death to life. So you see, that would mean if we know about this process takes place in the unconscious, that really is the source of life, of true life. So accordingly, we read at the very end of the Amduat, whoever knows this mystery, this mysterious psychic image, will be a well-provided Ak spirit. The Egyptian word Ak has something to do with, it could be translated as illuminated, an illuminated spirit. It has something to do with giving light, is an enlightened spirit, we could also say. Always will she or he leave and enter again the netherworld, or as we would say, the healing realm of the collective unconscious, and speak to the living, return to life, a true remedy proven 1,000,000 times. What these texts and illustrations offer is nothing less than the gnosis of an archetypal order emerging from the primordial darkness of the unconscious from time immemorial, proven 1,000,000 times. The hubris of modern man, his overestimation of consciousness, is completely alien, foreign to the archaic man. The archaic man experiences himself too much as a part of the cosmic drama surrounding him like the vast ocean surrounding a tiny little small island. Before going into more details of the sun god's journey through the netherworld, I will show you a scene on one of the pillars of the burial chamber of Thutmose III. This scene moves me deeply whenever I see it. We must not forget Thutmose III was one of the mightiest pharaohs of Egypt. It was him who made Egypt into a great world power. And what a humble gesture. He, the King of Kings, receives the water of life from the tree goddess. According to the text, it is Isis. Just as an infant receives his milk from the nursing mother. He is well aware of the fact that all his royal power is her gift, the gift of the blessing, a gift and blessing of the great goddess, his beloved. Let us now go into the different stages of the dramatic events during Re's journey through the netherworld. Once the great sun god has accomplished his daily work, he has become old and weary. For the ancient Egyptians, there is nothing like the Judeo-Christian eternal and almighty God, for all their gods and goddesses are part of the created world, and thus aging. As everything in this world, they must be periodically renewed. And man takes active part in this renewal. In fact, there is no renewal of the gods without the help of man. Thus, even the most powerful of all the gods, the sun god, exhausted from his daily work, must descend into the depths of the night and the netherworld, for only here, in his encounter with the primordial darkness, he can regenerate and regain the brilliant light of the new day. So you see, when we are depressed or exhausted, there is nothing wrong with it. It's a natural fact, a process of regeneration as even the sun god has to surrender to. We now proceed to the first hour. We enter the portal of the western gate, western horizon. The two middle registers, and only in these hours we have two registers. There is, of course, also a psychological meaning to it, but I cannot go into this now. Anyway, the two middle registers depict the river of the netherworld on which the sun bark travels along from west to east, from death to life. The so-called upper and lower register represent the two riverbanks. In both of them, in the first hour, at the very beginning, you see 9 baboons in these little squares, in their typical crouching position. Obviously, these baboons are the first beings who greet this great sun god. And look at the baboons as we find them in the tomb of Tutankhamun. That's one of the 9 friends, as I would always say. They welcome the sun god at his entrance with their jubilation, music, and dance. What a fascinating image! And it's very significant. Suppose you have a dream of a monkey, don't be too sure that it is only a silly monkey. It might easily be that it announces the arrival of the great god or goddess, that is, of an emerging regeneration process in your psyche, which at first can only be recognized by the animal soul. namely by an instinctual awareness, almost physical awareness, that senses or sense the presence of the approaching divine. In archaic psychology, the animals, and I would say also in our dreams, are the messengers of the divine spirit. Accordingly, the baboons belong traditionally to the entourage of the sun god. Quite surprisingly so, we learn that in the first 3 nocturnal hours here, by the way, it's the second hour, I will come to it immediately. We learn that in the first 3 nocturnal hours, the sun god and all who accompany him pass a fertile and even paradisiacal region. The dead are provided with everything they need, above all water and food. This mirrors their wish to participate in the continuity of life, even here in the dark caverns of the night. This is why, by the way, it is so important that whenever we feel depressed or just tired, so we just have to care for the daily life as much as possible. Not to do too much, just care for the daily life, just to continue with the normal life. Now in the middle register here you see 5 boats. The first is, as usual, the sunbark. Then you see a boat with 2 ears of corn providing the dead with food. In the next bark is a crocodile, which probably is a sign of the power of the sun god that is still valid in this region. Then you see the following bark is a Hathor symbol. That's the goddess of love. And we can say there is no transformation, no real transformation and renewal without love. And the final bark is the bark of Thoth, the moon god, who is always associated with renewal and healing especially. The second and third hour radiate a unique fascination, a region filled with divine peace, emphasizing, so to speak, the beauty of nature and of the material world. So we may say that these hours initiate the actual descent into the darker caverns of the following hours. And again, there is a deep psychological truth in this arrangement. It is as though the authors of the Amduat intended to say that no one should take the risk of descending into the depths of the unconscious without first beholding of the beauty of life. Or to put it in other words, without having first experienced true love as much as possible. Whoever has to deal with the really dark contents of the unconscious, or rather is forced to do by fate, will have the better chance to survive if he or she has first experienced the fortunate aspects of life, as concrete and intensive as possible. Otherwise, all too easily, we might fall victim to the darkness and its and its devouring power. But despite the most pleasant atmosphere and in a conspicuous contrast to the middle register and its beauty, the reality and presence of evil cannot be ignored. The archaic man can never forget, really never, the constant attacks of evil and demonic power. Too much his life is endangered. The enemies of the sun gods are all over, even here in this paradisiacal region. They must always be defeated. And this is, to mention just one example, illustrated by the tribunal of the 6 judges that you see in the upper register of this second hour. The scene represents the tribunal consisting of 6 judges, both male and female, seated on their thrones. each of them holds a knife in his or her lap, clearly demonstrating their function as punishers. Again, there is a deep psychological truth in this imagery. Whenever we have to descend into the depths of our own nature, we better do it with open eyes and with a sharp knife. I love this realism of the Egyptians. I appreciate what I would call the sword of love. The sword that kills in order to make alive. This masculine and feminine strength that holds the tension of the opposites in order to move on. To be good-hearted may be fine, but it's certainly not enough to do this journey. To sum up, we may now say that the first 3 hours of the sun god's night sea journey, with their rather peaceful atmosphere, contain what I would call the first or initial act of a fourfold drama. The fourfold drama of Res, or the soul's transfiguration during the 12 hours of the night. In its comforting aspects, it reminds me of many beginnings of an analytical work, because it often starts with quite pleasant and nice dreams, and for the analyst it's quite nice because he can give interesting interpretation. He can say, oh, that means this or that. But of course we know that after a while there will be a stagnation, a difficult period, a painful stagnation with its murky darkness. And this exactly will be the following, the theme of the second act of the drama, covering the following three nights through of the sunbark's journey. It is as if the unconscious with its beauty would lure us into more painful regions, or lure us with very nice dreams and impressive numinous dreams into more difficult stuff. I intentionally call Re's transfiguration during his night sea journey through the netherworld a drama with a fourfold structure. If you are familiar with Gnostic and alchemical texts, you will remember that they preferably describe the transformation process in 4 stages. As for instance, the Nigredo, the Albedo, the Citrinitas, and the Rubedo, and so on. This is what the Greek alchemists used to call a tetramery, which literally means dividing into 4. The fourfold structure of the world and of the self is an archetypal pattern, and it seems that C.G. Jung was not able to complete his masterpiece Mysterium Conjunctionis. He has written already the first 5 chapters, but then he had to penetrate this fourfold structure of the self first, and that's what he did in his work so brilliantly, in his work, especially in the last chapter of Aion. You might remember these complicated diagrams, but they are very, very meaningful if you try to understand them. So there is a deep kinship between the world of the ancient Egyptians, the Gnostics, the alchemists, and analytical psychology, and this is rooted in the quaternary way of thinking, which as a rule embraces the dynamic and cyclic process of the transformation. Thus, I suggest dividing the drama of Re's transfiguration during this journey through the night into 4 acts or stages, which actually differs from what I suggested in my book, but you see, one can always learn more about these texts. Anyway, now I suggest to do it in 4 steps. Act 1, exposition. We talked about it already. Act 2, the descent to the primordial darkness, that is, to the mystery of transformation and renewal at the deepest point of the netherworld. Act 3, the ascent and gaining strength, that's somehow recovering of this beginning. And Act 4, the final renewal, the birth of the divine child, or the appearance of the golden flower, or however you call it. Do we need a break here, or shall we
Maybe
continue?
we can take some questions and then we take
Yes,
a break.
okay. Because now we will enter the
Yeah.
real deep and dark part of the netherworld.
So why don't we, Steve, do you want to field some questions, either to Andreas or to myself? And then we'll follow that with a 10 or 15-minute break. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. We've got a couple email questions. I'm going to organize those and get back in a moment. Let me go again to Sonoma, then Asheville, and we'll briefly check in with Wilmington, see if they have any questions. Maybe a few people there. How about Sonoma? Do you all have any questions or comments at this point?
Yes, I think there are at least 2 or 3. Who would like to start?
So, hi, Steve. I have a question.
Go ahead,
I have a
Laura.
question for, Andreas. And it's actually from the image of the Tutmosis III, the tree goddess breastfeeding the pharaoh. I don't know if we want to go back to the image and look at it. But I had a question. I'll wait till it pulls up. Yeah. I had a question about what looks to me kind of like a double phallic image there. I was on the tree. Do you see in front of it?
That's the breast.
That's the, well, the breast looks like the pointy part. Oh, well, let me just tell you.
Yeah.
I was in Egypt last year, and I went to a place called Dendara. Have you been there, Dendara?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. And the crypt underneath, there's a crypt underneath, and it has kind of, I don't know what to call it, kind of phallic, balloony kind of renewal images etched into the walls of that crypt that remind me a lot of this image here. Andreas, have you seen that?
I don't realize. I don't see what you mean by the phallic part here.
Well,
Is
people
it
are
the
saying,
arm, maybe?
yeah, people are saying it's the arms.
That's the arm.
Yeah.
The arm holding the breast or presenting the breast to him.
Okay. So I'm making a connection maybe that, yeah, it just reminds me of something I saw in the crypt. Yeah.
In Dendara, there are very interesting images. We will come to this about the phallic, etiphallic sun god, or Osiris etiphallic. Yeah, probably you mean, that's what you mean. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll wait.
Yes.
I have a question. Steve, is it all right if I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Well, my question is related to the part in which you spoke of the objective psyche or the creative unconscious, and in which this primal dream that we're looking at could be seen as a projection of the objective psyche. I think that's what you said.
Yes.
And my question is this, and it's really a metaphysical question, and it's a very open-ended question. In the Jungian tradition, does everything become psyche, or is there a realm of being that is beyond psyche? I'm sorry, but that's what I want to ask.
This is Tom Singer. He's an analyst in San Francisco.
Okay, I certainly cannot answer this question, but I like it very much because we must be aware there is always something beyond psyche, as I would think. There is always this remaining unknown that we cannot reveal. So whenever we talk about such images, we can say we can approach them, but we can never solve the riddle or the mystery. It always remains a mystery. That's like as in love. If love is no mystery anymore, if you know everything about your wife or your husband, then you can say goodbye. That's it.
Yeah.
What a beautiful answer. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I like that question a lot too, Tom. I've thought quite a lot about that. It really has to do with the question of transcendence, and in one of his late essays, I think it's called "On the Nature of the Psyche." It's in volume 8, "On the Nature of the Psyche," where Jung uses the image of the spectrum. And he says the psyche extends from the infrared to the ultraviolet end of the spectrum. At the infrared end, it goes into the soma and into the material world, which is beyond the psyche. At a certain point, the psyche cannot anymore penetrate into that level of reality. And at the other end, he says it goes into, and there he kind of pauses for a second in the text, and he says it goes into what I can only call the spirit. And there it also disappears into something beyond itself. So at both ends of the spectrum, there is something beyond the psyche. And then he tries to tie those two things together by saying maybe there is a transcendent center beyond the soma and beyond the spirit that unites them, and that is the basis of synchronicity, where the signals from a single source are coming through psyche and the material world at the same time. So it's a moment in his writings where he does venture into kind of metaphysical speculation, which he's always very shy of. He doesn't like to do that, but that's one place that I've found, at least, that he does seem to offer some glimpse of his thinking about that question.
Thank you. Well, we do have a question here in Asheville. Do you want to go ahead and ask yours?
Thank you. This relates to Dr. Stein's introduction. I was curious, are there any postmodern theologians that talk about God's dark side, such as Buber, Boutman, Bonhoeffer, any of those, Tillich?
I really can't say for sure. There probably are, in the tradition itself, in the Orthodox, in the tradition of the creeds, the creedal, let's say the creedal Christian tradition. Of course, the dark side of God is not allowed, is not mentioned. God is all light, is all good, and what has stimulated some theologians to think about the dark side of God was the Holocaust, and also in Jewish theology, is God, if something like this can happen to a chosen people, let's say, people of the covenant, what is going on? Why does God allow such a thing? What is the meaning of this? And so, spectacular demonstrations of evil, like one saw in that period of history, has really called into question, if God's in charge of history, how can these kind of things happen in history? So theologians have had to take that on board. There are ways of getting around it, of course. Theodicies, saying, well, God is good and he means good even by such suffering, something good comes out of it. So in the end, things are good. Or one has to just be astonished and stumble over those manifestations of evil and I think where Jung went with that was to say that there are two sides of reality. Depending on where you stand, you'll experience something as good or evil, and if it's if you want to capture reality as a whole in your doctrine of God, which is what he wanted to do. I mean, as a theologian, quasi-theologian that he was, if you want to say that God is reality or represents the totality of reality or embraces all of reality, then from our standpoint, from the human standpoint, you have to say that that reality includes good and evil. We may not understand the ultimate purpose of all this, but certainly from our perspective as humans, it looks pretty bad, pretty dark. So I probably some modern theologians have gone there where Jung went. I wouldn't be surprised, but I don't know of them myself. I can't name them. Maybe you know some.
No,
Andreas.
no, I cannot.
Let me read one email question if I could. And this is from London, Ontario, Tony Wolfson. And I'm going to warn you, it's a little bit in depth. So if it's too much, you can pass. I'm going to give
We know Tony well, Steve.
Yes, we do.
Well, that makes sense because it starts off, hello, Murray. Hello, Andreas. And dear colleagues. I am not sure how to formulate a question, but I find myself very interested in the question of the human ego in regard to the journey through the underworld, in particular, and to the conception of the individual in ancient Egypt in particular. Obviously, we understand that there are imagined to be great risks attendant on the journey of the deceased person's soul through the underworld. And I understand that this was of the utmost concern in the Egyptian religious worldview. Is there anything comparable or equivalent to the concern with the human ego that I think is fairly safe to say begins to emerge in the Renaissance in Western Europe? I could elaborate at great length, only to add that I remember reading of tribes for whom it was not possible to say, I did this. Thoughts or comments on that?
Again, that's quite the question, because of course there is no ego development in Egypt as it is today, that's clear. So first it was only the pharaoh who could undergo such a process, but gradually in the New Kingdom, especially in the late New Kingdom, there is something what we call persönliche Frömmigkeit. That's a personal, piety, a personal piety. So this means that not only the pharaoh could be regenerated, but also every individual, and that took place around 1000, I would say, in the first around the first. It started with the New Kingdom, we can say. But only towards the end of the second millennia that took place. And this always was anticipated by a huge political crisis. So the individual really had to suffer from the political situation, and then they started to approach God individually. So that's again such a shift in the archetypal situation of humankind. But otherwise, I cannot say more. It's a difficult question.
Well, certainly, with the in the Greek and Judeo-Christian, the biblical tradition, of course, the ego does become much stronger. The value of the individual is really taken on board, and I think we've inherited that. Somewhere in his correspondence with Victor White, Jung says that psychotherapy comes out of this, out of the biblical, and particularly in Europe, the Christian tradition, and it's placing the value on the individual, and he's speaking about the attack on the individual from fascism, from all the fascistic systems that wanted to emphasize the collective as opposed to the individual, the masses instead of the individual, the way you get it in fascism and communism. And that psychotherapy and the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition really uphold the value of the individual. So that does then in the Enlightenment, of course, produce a kind of egocentrism. You could say when these what we have produced is conscious, self-conscious individuals are cut off from the religious tradition. What do you have left? That's what Andreas was saying. You have an ego that's out of touch with its spiritual background, without its tradition, without its depth. So you've got an isolated ego. That's egocentrism or egoism. And what Jung was trying to do was restore a connection to the self, which is the self is the anima mundi. It's the whole, and it contains the archetypal world and the mythological world. So the restoring of the ego, this connection to the self is equivalent to taking this isolated ego to another stage of development, not going back into a mythological period, but going forward into a kind of consciousness that connects the individual to the whole, reconnects, you could say, but in a new way, because now you've got a very strong ego development in the individual connecting to the whole, whereas the ego was born out of the collective, cut itself off from the collective, now has to reconnect to the collective. That's the next stage. That's postmodern. Tom, that will come later in California, and we will await its arrival on our shores. Everything starts in California, I understand.
Well, shall we take a break?
Yeah.
That would be good.
Okay.
Let's do a 10-minute break.
Yeah, we now come to Act 2, covering the 4th to the 6th hours. With the 4th hour of the night, we leave the beauty of the previous hours. Now we descend into the primordial darkness. The sunbark enters the land of Sokar, an old earth god. In the land of silence, as it is also called, the darkness becomes so intense that even the sun god cannot see those who dwell on the riverbanks. He can only hear them. Ray's journey has clearly reached a new stage here. The sunbark has run aground in the shallows, as you can see. It has to be rowed. It can no longer be rowed along the flowing water. It has to be towed through the sandy region by 4 assisting deities. And again, this is an example for the strong emphasis on the quaternary number in the Amduat. Several times the sunbark's journey is blocked by doors that bar the way and by a confusing zigzag path. The wasteland of Sokar is teeming with snakes, indicating a beginning of a process of dissolution. From the psychology of alchemy and the alchemical process, we know that dissolution of the dominant consciousness is an indispensable precondition of renewal. There is no renewal without dissolutio. Each real transformation process and renewal of consciousness is anticipated by the loss of and destruction of an old attitude. Therefore, the alchemists used to say, and I love this word and I often quote it, it is easier to produce the gold than to destroy it. It is easier to produce the gold than to destroy it. The real problem is to give up the old attitude. That is all our pet ideas, our silly belief that we do know what is good and what is not good, what is good and what is bad, all sorts of these illusions that we cherish of ourselves and of our surrounding world. Now, in the midst of this darkness, of this chaos, I would rather say, there is a sign of hope. There are several signs of hope. You cannot see it on this, but I will show you. It's in the final scene of the 4th hour, in the lower register, we find the following scene. It represents the winged sun disk called Khepri, the scarab beetle, surrounded by 14 stars and human heads with sun disks on their top. 14 stars at the nocturnal sky with its mild radiation of light, even in this gloomy, dark region of the netherworld. The scarab or Khepri beetle, Kheper in Egyptian language means to become, to transform, to be renewed, and so on. Werden in Deutsch is the traditional symbol of the juvenile and renewed form of the sun god. Thus, the winged Khepri beetle of this scene points ahead in time to the renewal that will take place only at the end of the 12th hour. Of course, this renewal of consciousness cannot reach yet the clarity of daylight. Again, there is a deep psychological truth in this, a deep meaning. Quite often you can experience that in the midst of the worst and most painful stagnation or even depression, a dim light of a new awareness, a gleam of hope, so to speak, occurs in the firmament of the nocturnal sky that is of the unconscious. It might be a dream image or a consoling image in an active imagination that anticipates the healing and renewal sometimes long before it actually takes place. And the analyst, it's important that we know and we remember such anticipating images always, because the analysand won't believe that there is any hope or that there were any signs of hope. So it's so important to remember. Of course, we can never say when it happens, and that is due to the fact that the unconscious has a complete different time system. We now turn to the fifth. Yeah, by the way, the goddess with the Ma'at, with the feather, the ostrich feather on her top is Ma'at. I will come to her immediately. We now enter the 5th hour of the night, called the Cavern of Sokar. It continues in far greater depths the theme of the 4th hour, the dark night of the soul, as we may say. The water is still shallow. Still the Sunbear Park must be towed, this time by 7 male and 7 female deities. That the goddesses precede their male counterparts corresponds to the fact that these images were created by man. For a man it is the feminine, it's the anima who creates the future. She will tow him through the worst periods of his life, and she will show him the way to proceed, and she will renew his masculinity. Or, if he doesn't listen to her, she will give him hell. In an individual woman's life, it would be a strong, creative, yet still playful animus who serves as counterpart of her femininity. In approaching the threatening side of the collective unconscious, any kind of one-sidedness can be extremely dangerous. And this is why the Egyptians put so much emphasis all over the Egyptian history. You find this emphasis on the harmonious balance between the opposites. The double sphinx that you see in the lower register represents the earth god Akar and is one of the most striking examples of this typical Egyptian striving for the conjunctio oppositorum, that is, for the regenerative power of the union of the opposites. I will discuss this symbol later. Another instance for the strong commitment to the feminine, to the process of renewal, is the presence of the goddess Ma'at. I'm not sure whether you can see it, perhaps not. It's at the very beginning of the first register. Again, she has this ostrich feather on her head, which is in fact a hieroglyphic writing of Ma'at, or justice. I show you a beautiful depiction of Ma'at, coming as we find it in the tomb of Nofretari. Ma'at embodies the social justice and the cosmic order that is, and in this way she resembles Sophia of the Hebrew Bible, the wisdom of ordered creation. The wisdom of ordered creation. And this is her message to all those who pass the murky dark the region. May the divine order of creation not cease. not even in the impenetrable darkness of this cavern. May the process continue, the process of creation, even in this most critical moment. May the laws of Ma'at, or may, as we should put it, the archetypal psychic order of the unconscious prove to be valid even here, so intimately close to the abysmal presence of dissolution, chaos, and non-being. May she be stronger than depression, despair, dissolution, and so on. The imagery of the fourth hour, perhaps apart from the final hour, contains what I consider the richest and, concerning its psychological implications, the most profound symbolism of the Amduat. The tension so close to the actual event of the transformation and renewal in the sixth hour, the following hour of the night, can hardly be increased. As a law, the critical moment just before and just after the actual turning point of renewal is the most decisive, the most dangerous, but also the most fascinating and exciting part of the whole transitional process. The most significant images we find exactly in the middle of each register, dominated by the head of Isis in the center. According to the myth, Isis, with her deep love, protected, nurtured, and cared for the Horus child when he was exposed to the persecution of Seth. And as faithful and loving companion of Osiris, she preserves and renews all injured life. She, more than any other deity, is responsible for the healing of body and soul. Like a guardian, Isis seems to protect the fragile process of healing taking place in this cavern of Sokar. Look at this. Isis, as you find her on the sarcophagus of Thutmose IV, protecting the king in his way to the other world. Like those protective figure and blessing figures that we can find in active imagination and sometimes in dreams, she takes care of him in this dangerous pathway. Just above the head of Osiris, we see this so-called burial mound or coffin of Osiris, god of death and ruler of the netherworld. On the top of it, you see the hieroglyph for night, a clear allusion to the darkness of this place. Nigredo, depression, fear, and death are present in this fifth hour of the night. But there are also the two birds on both sides, representing Isis and Nephthys, the two sisters of Osiris. Their task is to awaken him to new life, with their mournful wailing and with him all blessed dead. Once again, the nascent life is embodied by the figure of the scarab, or Khepri beetle, that seems to be emerging from the sandhill or the tomb. This scene therefore clearly demonstrates that the tomb or the coffin provides shelter to the mysterious process of regeneration. The great mystery, however, is illustrated in the cavern of Sokar in the lower register. The figure standing in the middle is Sokar, a falcon-headed god, an old earth god. He seems to hold and protect a winged serpent with one human and three serpent heads. The serpent is, as the accompanying text declares, the great god himself, meaning the sun god, who obviously represents a stereomorphic form of the sun god. He spreads his wings with multicolored plumes. Once more we can see that an animal, this time a serpent, can symbolize and anticipate the mysterious birth of the new light that is of a decisive extension of consciousness. The wings are primordial images for the heavenly protection of the divine child, who, as a rule, is threatened by satanic darkness. Think of the birth of Jesus. Now both Sokar, the standing god, and the serpent god are surrounded by an oval of sand, carefully guarded by another earth god. Aker, here in his form as the double sphinx. The oval represents the whole netherworld. It is like a maternal womb, carrying what the Chinese alchemist would call the sacred embryo, that is, the newly emerging life. Aker, the double sphinx, can also occur as double lion, as you see here in this beautiful part of a papyrus Hunefer, which is around 1000 before our era. The owner of this tomb and his bas soul standing behind him worship Aker, who gives birth to the new rising sun, rising from the horizon between the two mountains. A traditional image for the great mystery of regeneration through death. It seems that the deceased is not so much concerned about his individual life after death, but about being part in the cosmic regeneration as symbolized by the rising sun. You may have seen the picture that we have back here. I don't know if you cannot so see it. It's too far away. Anyway, it is the logo. It's the logo of Eranos, of our annual Eranos conference, and it depicts also the double lion Aker. In the middle there is the head of a cow, probably Isis again, and in the Uroboric snake there is the child, the divine child. So with his throat, Aker swallows everything that enters the western gate, only to give it over to new life in the east. Aker becomes a symbol of potency and regeneration in general, because it is through his mysterious powers that all life force and vitality renew and regenerate. The double lion is the mythological expression of what Jung so aptly called the law of the self-regulating function of the opposites. The law of the self-regulating function of the opposites. And referring to the enantiodromia, a term that comes from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, as a fundamental law of nature, at first Jung continues, I quote, "The only person who escapes the grim law of enantiodromia is the man who knows to separate himself from the unconscious, not by repressing it, for then it simply attacks him from the rear, but by putting it clearly before him as that which he is not." I apologize for the masculine way of expression. Of course, the same holds true for in a woman's life. She also must be aware of that which she is not. Again, the authors of the Amduat have found the most ingenious image for that which he is not, namely he, the sun god of the daily sky. Guess what it is? That what the sun god is not, his corpse. So, the winged serpent god, so carefully protected by the two earth gods, Sokar and Aker, is called the secret flesh, that is the corpse of the sun god. And now it might be confusing that the same symbol, namely the serpent god in the cavern of Sokar, at the same time is called the sacred embryo and the corpse of the sun god. The image or symbol, however, points to the mysterious union of the opposites that is beyond any logical comprehension. But it's certainly true that we cannot really understand some of the most paradoxical events of our life. They remain a mystery to us. On the other hand, we do know that they are true, just because we have experienced them. And that is what I would call the grace or gift of gnosis, a gift of life that I would never like to miss. Despite its paradoxical character, it is one of the most precious gifts of life. And that is why I always say we cannot really understand if a healing has taken place in an analysis. We just don't know what really happened. We move on to the 6th hour, where the great transformation and the great mystery takes place. Here, the corpse of the sun god, you see it at him at the very right side of the middle register, becomes the central theme. At midnight, the sun god and all the accompanying deities and blessed dead have reached the deepest point in the realm of the dead. Here they touch on the very edge of the primeval waters of Noon, the god of the watery primordial chaos. In the middle register of this hour we see the corpse, lying encircled by a huge Euroboric, multi-headed serpent with many faces. And that is how it is depicted in the tomb of Thutmose III. The accompanying text calls him flesh of Khepri, which is a paradox, of course. You can see the scarab above the head of Re's corpse. He represents, as we have seen, the renewed and juvenile form of the sun god. As a sign of its living power, the sun god can also be depicted etyphalic, and that is what refers to this Dendera, probably this question about Dendera, because there Osiris is often depicted in his dead state, but etyphalic. Or also here is a sign of renewal, namely this arm that hand pointing to his mouth, referring to the hieroglyphic sign for child. So again, this image embraces the greatest opposites of death and life, the corpse and the child or the embryo. Now the central theme of these hours, and indeed of the whole Amduat, is the union of the bas soul of the sun god with his corpse. This is a beautifully depiction from a late papyrus in the 19th papyrus Ani. You find it in the British Museum around 1240 before our era. What you see is the winged bas soul uniting with the dead. In what you see, what the bas soul offers is the Shenring, the so-called Shenring to the dead. That is the eternal, a symbol of the eternal life, a cyclic renewal of life. The bas soul is the freely moving soul, not so much bound to earth, but striving for the daily sky. This union with his corpse suggests, in terms of psychology, that every profound psychic renewal does require a descent to the deepest stratum of the collective unconscious, to the corpse. I do not hesitate to call this union a mysterium conjunctionis. The renewal, however, would not be possible with the events illustrated by the scene directly above the Uberic serpent encircling the corpse of the sun god. It shows, as the text states, the threefold burial of the sun god. His corpse is obviously dismembered. This dismemberment alludes to that of Osiris, which, as the myth recounts, was healed through the deep and, despite all menace, insisting love of Isis. Painfully so as it might be, the dismemberment is inevitable, for it necessarily precedes, or as we rather should say, coincides with the healing union of the opposites. You find this idea all over in alchemy. There is no alchemical transformation without dissolution, dismemberment, calcination, incineration, fragmentation, and so on forth. In a dim memory of their Egyptian sources, as I believe, the alchemists called their massa confusa, their substance, the corpse. So in the text of the alchemists too, the corpse, that is their metals, is the seedbed of transformation and renewal. But in fact, I hesitate to call this renewal, as described in the Egyptian book of the Netherworld, a transformation. For we cannot really say the old simply transforms into the new. The new is so completely new that there is no evidence of connection anymore. Perhaps we would better say the old flips into the new, as death to life. There are some profound experiences in our life which change us so completely that afterwards we are not and we will never be the same person anymore. And even the world might be not the same anymore. This is, for instance, true for traumatic or any numinous experiences, for deepest pain, deepest joy, for the divine experience in any case. Now all this takes place at the deepest point of the netherworld at midnight, this union. In the Zohar, this basic text of the Kabbalists, we find a beautiful story about the specific quality of midnight. It runs like this. Rabbi Abba wanted to visit the house of his father-in-law. On his way, he spent his night in a guest house and asked his host to wake him up exactly at midnight. No problem, the host answered. I have a special clock that wakes me up just at midnight. Oh, Rabbi Abba was quite astonished and wondered, how does this come? Well, his host replied, I made this clock for a certain old man. He was in the habit of getting up every night at midnight to study Torah. To this, Rabbi Abba said, Blessed be God for bringing me here. But why did he do so? He asked his host. And the host answered, My grandfather told me that the accuser angels below are busy all about the world during the first half of the night. But exactly at midnight, the accusations halt. For at this moment, God enters the paradise. And so my grandfather was accustomed to get up at this hour and sing praises, addressing God as midnight. The young son of the innkeeper, however, who heard this, had a different explanation, and it's clear for every reader of Kabbalistic texts that if a young man speaks in them, it is in fact the famous Rabbi Simeon from the 2nd century who speaks. Anyway, this young man said, This is what I heard. The first half of night is the period of judgment, while the second half takes illumination from the side of mercy. the side of grace. It seems that these Kabbalists still knew the ancient wisdom of the book of the netherworld, for it is at the deepest point of midnight that the mysterious renewal takes place. Now I must see how much time we have left. Yeah, I continue. I continue with Act 3, gaining strength, with the 7th hour, which in fact is quite an interesting hour. Again and again, the text of the Amduat gives a strong admonition not to be inattentive at the decisive moment of revival from the depths. This is of great psychological importance. Whenever a new content emerges from the unconscious, it is crucial that we devote our entire awareness and attention to it in order to bring it into consciousness. Otherwise, only too easily, it will slip back into the unconscious of the realm of the dead. This almost deadly danger is the main theme of the 7th hour. In the middle register, in front of the Sandborg, but safely separated by a wall, we see the serpent demon Apopis, obstructing the journey of the sun god. The coils of this body are pierced with knives, and 2 deities hold him bound for slaughter. To the right we see the 4 goddesses, another quaternion, each one with a knife in her hand. Their names reveal the wrathful side of the feminine, which cannot be missed here. She who cuts into pieces, she who annihilates, and so forth. The threat to ordered existence is an archetypal motive, just as newly awakened consciousness begins to radiate its first light, it is threatened by the renewed and this time final darkness. New creation attracts evildoer. Apophis' strong intention is to destroy the order of the cosmos, to bring the sun bark to a standstill. Psychologically, however, we could state the matter also the other way around. If you are sometimes filled with terror and existential angst, or afflicted with the torment of depression, however severely, it is most likely that the germ of a new psychic content is struggling to emerge from the unconscious, from the collective unconscious, so as to cause a decisive change in somebody's life. Deo concedente, as the alchemists always added, by the grace of God. Now, there are at the prow of the sunbark, there are 2 standing deities. You can hardly see them, but there are 2 standing deities to ward off Apophis. It's the goddess Isis. In the first hour, we saw her carrying her caring and loving side. Here we meet another side of her. The great goddess always has been the goddess of love and of war. Think of the Babylonian Inanna Ishtar. She is the goddess of love and the goddess of war. And she certainly knows, Isis too, certainly knows how to handle her weapons and gets infuriated whenever the continuity and the dynamic of life is threatened by a standstill. I always like to say that there is the goddess, the great goddess, hates nothing more than a standstill, when the dynamic cannot continue anymore. Here, Isis defends the sun gods against Apopis, the serpent demon, and she is not alone. There is Seth with her. But wait a minute, I have to. Yes, I can talk about him too. The second figure that wards off Apophis, the arch enemy of the sun god, is called the eldest magician, in whom we can recognize a form of Seth. Now this is, if you know who Seth is, that is quite surprising. Why would Seth defend the sun god against Apopis? Here you see him fighting off Apopis. That's from a late papyrus. Seth is the murderer and of his brother Osiris and the antagonist of any order in creation, who otherwise is associated with Apopis. But now he stands in the sunbug to defeat the everlasting enemy of the sun god. He who represents blind desire, a dark emotional primal power and energy, is now the first and most important of res defender. Similia similibus curantur. Like heals like, runs an old saying. In terms of psychology, we might say Seth embodies shadow impulses, dark affects and emotions, rage and aggression, which are inevitable, for there is no other way to overcome the torment of a psychic stagnation at times. At times, Seth's dark force must accompany the process of individuation. If you accept them, these forces, you might even find a small piece of gold in the shadow. This is the gold in the dirt, as mentioned so often by the Gnostics, according to the alchemist, the philosophical stone on the dunghill. With the 7th hour of the night, the third act of the renewal has started. In this stage, the consciousness is gradually increasing. I will now skip the following 3 hours. They all talk about this increasing strengthening in the process of renewal. And we go to Act 4, the 11th hour, emerging of the new consciousness. Unfortunately, I cannot discuss this 11th hour in details because I want to spare some time for the last most important hour, the 12th hour. The main theme of the 11th hour is, however, the renewal of time, as demonstrated by the huge multi-coiled serpent carried by 12 gods in the middle register. Of course, they represent the 12 hours of the night. Otherwise, this mystery is illustrated by the symbol of the united Re Osiris, as you see it here. This is a beautiful illustration from the tomb of Nofretari again. Re and Osiris, they both stand for a contrary conception of time. Re, the sun god, represents the everlasting return of everything. That is a cyclic and dynamic process, whereas Osiris, on the contrary, guarantees the continuum of time, duration. The symbol that you see here from this tomb beautifully demonstrates the dual unity, or the union of the opposites, which is so typical for Egyptian way of thought. Again, the mystery is protected by the two sisters, Isis and Nephthys, by the feminine. Now we move on to the 12th hour, as it is as we see it in the. No, that's not. That's of Amenophis II, as far as I remember. At the very end of the Amduat, in the lower register, just beneath the solar beetle about to be born, we see Osiris in his form of a mummy, reclining against the semicircular border that seals the netherworld. Can you see it just in the lower register, the very right side? It is so true. So death has been overcome. It remains always a bitter reality, a brutal reality, as I would say. Indeed, every creative act, every developmental step with its accompanying joy, is mixed with a grain of sadness and melancholy. When birth, transformation and renewal are so very much present as they are at Re's appearance on the eastern horizon, then Osiris, the enduring, must remain behind in his evident rigor mortis. And there he must wait until Re is exhausted in the course of the day, once again returns to Osiris as an old man in need of rejuvenation. In the Book of the Dead Spell 175, there is a very moving passage in which Osiris, god of death, bewails his destiny in front of Atum, the primeval god of creation. O Atum, how comes it that I travel to a desert of the netherworld, which has no water and no air, and which is so deep, so dark, and so infinite? And Atum answers, you live there in peace of your heart. But this cannot content nor console Osiris. But there is no love-making there. And Atum, appeasing him, I have given Ba being, which would be psychic animation or psychic life, instead of water, air and love-making, contentment in place of bread and beer. This seems to console Osiris at least partially. And see your face, Atum. I do not tolerate that you suffer from lack. Osiris is still not completely satisfied. It's so human. He still complains, but every other god has taken place in the bark of millions. Every god has taken place in the bark of the sun god. Only he, Osiris, must remain in the depths of the netherworld. Who would not understand Osiris, who despite the promising Ba being and blissful existence nevertheless bemoans his destiny, his loss of life's abundance and pleasure? That is the sad aspect of death, and that can never, that will always remain. Now, again, the main topic of this hour is in the Middle Register. 12 gods and 13 goddesses, all looking back to the sun god, pull him and all the blessed dead traveling with him through the lens of a giant serpent. They are full of anticipation of the miracle of rejuvenation that obviously takes place inside this murky darkness of the serpent. This becomes clear by the names of the towering goddess, deities. The gods who have yet to enter the serpent have names like old man, grey-haired, and so forth. They obviously represent the old, worn-out male principle of consciousness. Quite the contrary is true of the goddesses in front. Their names include Lady of Time, she who beholds the perfection of Re, the Eternal One, and the like. It is this god, the serpent god, from whom the final mystery of regeneration emerges. Just before the birth of the solar child, in the morning, all those in the sunbark must once more plunge into the murky depths, not knowing whether they will escape from this darkness. This indeed is the experience of a deep humiliation, when we once more are confronted with our shadow, with our impulses of shadow. There will be no real change of consciousness, no genuine renewal, until we have recognized the evil that comes from within. It is not enough to know that I should not do this or that. I do it. And it's not enough to know that this or that is bad or evil. I am bad or evil. A human being has terrifying sides, and I am no exception. This is the humiliation that the dark serpent god offers. And it cannot be avoided by anyone who participates in the new creation. But if you accept it, you can make the most surprising discovery. Not the accuser angels and not the demons of judgment welcome you on the other side, but the goddesses of life and love. Whoever has experienced the pain of the serpent god, his or her heart will be filled with love. Why? Just because he or she has now started to accept the justness of life. This means not to relate anymore to the unconscious for any profit and any purpose, however good one's situation may be. Marie-Louise von Franz once talked in this sense about the uselessness of the unconscious. We may discuss this later, the uselessness of the unconscious. With this intense, warm and loving atmosphere, the Amduat ends. Now the actual birth of the soul or child takes place. For one last time we encounter the sun god transformed into the scarab beetle, symbol of renewal and of life in the netherworld. At the very end of the 12th hour we meet Shu, receiving the scarab with open arms. At the very end, Shu, according to the myth, separated the sky goddess Nut from the earth god Geb, heaven from earth. He now welcomes the sun god with open arms in order to elevate him above the horizon as the morning sun of a new day. Finally, the miracle of regeneration that started in the dark cavern of the 6 hours at midnight is realized. The sun rises on the eastern horizon. The new light is born, the divine child of a new age. More than anything else, it is this intimate closeness to the eternal mystery of renewal that constitutes the deep fascination of the Amduat. Nowhere this becomes more evident as in the last hour of the night, where sky and earth are so tenderly close to each other. They almost tenderly embrace each other. Whoever has experienced this closeness of heaven and earth, we talked about this at the beginning of our discussion about when Murray talked about experiences in nature, of the numinous in nature. So whoever has experienced this closeness of heaven and earth, be it in the desert, be it in the mountains or at the sea, or in any numinous experience of the soul, he or she will never forget this mysterium conjunctionis that creates such a deep and persisting love. Whoever knows this mysterious image will be a well-provided ark spirit, a blessed dead. Always will she or he leave and enter again the netherworld, the healing realm of the collective unconscious, and speak to the living, return to life, a true remedy proven 1,000,000 times. And that is how the Amduat ends. So you have to.
So, thank you, Andreas. That was brilliant and wonderful and moving. Steve, do you want to manage the questions again? Maybe I could just make a comment. When I read this book and studied it, wrote a review about it, it did occur to me to think about the hours of the night, starting at 6 o'clock in the evening until 6 o'clock in the morning. You've got the 12 hours of the night. And the first hour, which is called the Jubilation of the Baboons, is the cocktail hour in our home.
Inviting,
So
yeah.
it's inviting you to the evening and luring you into the night. So yeah, we've started. Yeah, and the dark hours of the night. There is a tradition in European mythology called the hour of the wolf.
Uh-huh.
The hour of the wolf can be most any time at night. I think it's often associated with around 4 a.m., 3 or 4 a.m. A lot of people die during that hour in hospitals and so on. It's well known. And the hour of the wolf is when you face the monster Apophis in the night. If you wake up and can't go back to sleep and you have very, very dark thoughts and you're being threatened by world disorder and chaos, I think you get the feeling of what this book is about, that journey through the darkness. So literally it's the 12 hours of nighttime, and then the sun rises. Sun also rises, and you wake up perhaps refreshed and renewed, and a miracle has happened. Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully, yes.
So it's really a wonderful depiction of a journey through very dark places, and I think Andreas's interpretation of these pictures and his deep study of the Egyptian religion and mythology really brings it into our time and into our presence in a way that we can really make use of. That was one of Jung's great gifts also, to take myths, ancient pieces of religion and mythology, and make them relevant to psychological life today. This isn't just something that was thought about and imagined 2,500 years ago. We have similar experiences, and we can relate to that level of existence today in our own contemporary life experience. So, questions for discussion?
Yes, let me check in to see if Wilmington is there. I know Wilmington had, I believe, just a few people. Wilmington, are you there? If so, how many folks? And do you have any questions today?
Steve, they have not reconnected, sir.
Okay, that's fine. Just want to check out. Okay. Let me ask Asheville. Any questions from Asheville? Nothing burning. I'm going to read an email question, which is more of a dream that's connected to it. This is from Christina from, I think, Brazil. No, this is Vancouver. I'm sorry. Christina from Vancouver. I have had dreams of guiding boats or planes filled with dead people, sometime in pairs, up into the stars. How does this relate? But then a second question, recently dreamed of visiting purgatory. There seemed to be emotional cleansing going on from dark pools of water. There was a solar male figure, image of the sun with legs, who seemed to help. This seems to coincide with the journey of the dead. How does the journey help humanity as a whole? Any thoughts on that?
I didn't get the question. Can you repeat it?
Well, it's not
Did
really
you get it?
It's more a comment than question. It mentions two dreams.
It's some dreams.
The second is visiting purgatory, having a cleansing experience. The essence of the question is, how does the journey of the dead, i.e. the 12 hours of nocturnal journey in the Egyptian symbolism of the dead, how does that help humanity as a whole? Or I guess, does it help humanity as a whole? So, big
How
question.
does it help humanity as a whole? Is that the question?
Yes.
It is, yeah. I know that's reaching a bit, but any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I personally would be lost, completely lost in this world if I wouldn't have such documents of the past that help me to bring an order into the chaos of the unconscious as we experience, and into the chaos of our daily life. it is exactly, it is for me very important what you, Murray, said at the beginning, that only by finding a myth, and that means by finding a concrete structure, we can find an orientation in our life. And such texts as, for instance, the Amduat, and also of Gilgamesh, for instance, the Gilgamesh epos, also these are archetypal, there is an archetypal order in it, how the individuation runs again and again. And so I think we cannot, there is nothing like creating future without being rooted in the past and without knowing about these images of the collective unconscious.
So images like this could help make sense of those dreams that Christine recounted. Purgatory, the cleansing of the soul. There's a kind of deep process of rebirth, renewal, or cleansing. I mean, purgatory in Dante's version, at least, is a very important stage of moral and spiritual development. You know, step by step, working one's way through the cardinal sins and discovering the cardinal virtues. And the first one and the most important one is the sin of pride. And really that has to do with dealing with narcissism and putting narcissism to rest and confronting oneself in a deep sense through these 7 stages of self-inspection and self-analysis, and it's really a deep moral journey. So purgatory isn't an easy journey. I mean, you don't just float through it. It's very difficult, and you can't take the second step before you finish the first one. You can't go on to tackle a later vice until you've conquered the previous one. There is an organization to it. And what myths offer, and this is what's so beautiful in Andreas's book and his account of these, the orderly way in which a process proceeds, and knowing that order and knowing something about it provides orientation and containment, so you know where you are in a process. That's what myths can help you do. You can say, here's where I am in an individuation process, and they can give you guidance and a perspective on what's going on. Without that, and modernity is without that. Modernity is devoid of any of these maps. It has nothing to offer other than rationality and scientific evidence and what are the proofs and how many statistics do you have, and can tell you nothing about the life of the soul. So without these images from antiquity, as Andreas says, certainly we who deal in soul matters and deal with the unconscious and with dreams would be at a loss as to what to make of it. So much of it looks chaotic, and one is at the mercy of countless forces that are pulling one in this direction or that. So the mythology, the religions have offered guidance, containment, and orientation. And what we do now when we study myths is to rediscover some of those paths that have been trodden ever again and again by ancient people who were deeply in touch with the archetypal level of the psyche. We're quite cut off from it in contemporary times.
I would like to give a concrete example of my analytical practice. I remember that was about 20 years ago. But anyway, it was a woman with quite a psychotic background, and she had this dream of dismemberment. So she dreamt of a body that was dismembered, and of course she was shocked and thought, I'm completely falling apart. And then, if you know about such a myth like the dismemberment of Osiris and the healing process that Isis with her love initiates, and if you recount such a myth to such a client, then, and I did so, and she was completely somehow consoled. She said, "Oh, in this case,
That's containment.
I'm contained in humanity. I'm not completely out of the normal of humanity."
There is a scene in Jung's Red Book where he is close to the edge of the chaos, and he says he's just touching a thin membrane, and if he pokes through it, the waters from the sea, from outside, will flood in, and he will be consumed in the chaos of a disordered psyche. And there is that possibility that madness will just be unleashed, and I think that's the experience of modern life, that madness has been unleashed. It's very hard to make sense of the world unless you have some kind of a pattern in mind. Why is this happening to us? Does it have any meaning? Is it going anywhere? Myths offer that. Now, you can't prove that a myth is true or false, but it does give containment to the psyche, and it gives comfort to the soul, and it offers us with some direction for how to think and where to go. Of course, that always has to be balanced with our rational evaluation also of what is happening in the world and where things are going. But rationality by itself doesn't offer the full human being enough to give a sense of meaning. It can give a momentary sense of direction. Okay, I'll invest in this industry instead of that one. That's a rational decision. But when all hell breaks loose and chaos appears, and you start wondering, well, what's the value of money at all? It's going here and it's going there. The markets are crashing. The whole thing is falling apart. Does that have any meaning? Does that mean we're in the midst of a restructuring period? So mythology can offer a narrative account of where we are, where we need to go, what we need to do. And I think that's very important for people's feeling of containment. I come back to that word over and over again, containment.
Mm-hmm. And also for the analysts, I would say, the more I know about this mythology, the easier I can recognize dream motives. There are shocking dream motives, but if you can associate it with a myth, then it is embedded in a broader context, and then it becomes a complete different meaning. And people can be shocked by a certain dream, and then you add it to you embed it in such a context, and then they are contained, immediately contained.
Let me shift over to Sonoma. Tom and Laurel, do you have any comments or questions, things to add at this point?
Well, I have a few comments to this very stimulating conversation. First, I realize why out here in Sonoma we've been behind you all in terms of finding a myth. We're at least 6 or 7 hours behind you, so while you're in the 12th hour, I think we're in the 6th hour. So I'm going to make a few comments from the 6th hour.
We're in the hour of jubilation of the baboons over here.
I assure you, but I actually want to take this to make a comment sort of on the collective level in terms of the chaos, which I think Murray has been alluding to. But what comes to mind, and particularly the idea of purgatorio, there's a new book that we worked on called Psyche in the City, and one of the best chapters in the book is by a fellow from Australia, a Jungian analyst named Craig Sanroque, who takes the purgatory story and projects it onto the city of Sydney itself, and then walks the reader through the soul of the city as being in a state of purgatory. And it's a wonderful use both of the myth of purgatory, Dante's myth of purgatory, which actually it turned out Dante in the 12th century had never been in the southern hemisphere, although Purgatorio was set under the Southern Cross. It's kind of an interesting idea. But these soul stories aren't just for individuals. They are soul stories of cultures. And so the Pharaoh isn't just it can be about a whole civilization. It can be the experience of death and rebirth at a cultural level of the psyche of the cultural, and I think Craig does a wonderful job of that in his description of Sydney, Australia. And the other thought, the last piece of my comment has to do with a study I did of a drawing that Joe Henderson did in 1929, and I think it really fits with what Murray said, that the people who were drawing mandalas after Jung in the late 20s and so on, that the modern world had basically collapsed. There had been the Great Depression, there had been the Great World War, and whatever myth of the Enlightenment or the Enlightenment myth had really collapsed. And so people were looking for an orienting vision of the world, a containing vision. And so a lot of those early mandalas really can be seen as a collective urge to find an orienting myth through an image, not just at the individual level. Those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that.
Art, and did you have a question too?
Yeah, I've got a comment to add to the last round, because I think one of the questions that I've been living with is, okay, Jungian analysis basically connects the individual to these deeper archetypal patterns, and Tom raised the question of, okay, how do we connect collectively in healthy ways as contrasted to things like cults and ideologies and fascism? And you were talking about the collapse of the stock market and so on and so forth, and monetary instability that we're experiencing right now, and it occurred to me that actually maybe what is going on is that collectively we are in a stage of purgatory. And if that's true, and also actually a lot of the cultural clashes that we find going on, particularly perhaps in the United States around immigration issues and whatnot. So there's a lot of chaos out there that feels at least very purgatorial. And so I'm wondering what thoughts you have about the collective, how we organize collectively as well as individually by going into analysis.
Yes, very good question. I think Jung used a myth to understand world history when he wrote Ion, a book that Andreas was referring to. He used the myth of the Platonic ages, that we're leaving the age of Pisces and we're moving into the age of Aquarius. And the age of Pisces had certain features, and the age of Aquarius will have other features, and there's a transition time in between. So that's an example of a use of a big idea, say a mythical idea, that the Platonic years, to understand the course of history and to begin to try to anticipate what's coming, what to look for. Okay. Again, it's a matter of orientation and containment. If you have something like that, a turbulent time like we're in now, the astrologers will say, "Oh, of course, that's a part of this transition. It's going to get very turbulent. We're moving from one level of consciousness, one type of consciousness, Pisces, to another one, Aquarius, and the transition times are always death and rebirth. I mean, the old has to die and before the new can be born, as Andreas said." So it's a way of understanding the chaos and confusion and finding some orientation in it. The myths are also alive in many aspects of modern culture, but they're used to certain ends that one has ethical questions about. For instance, in advertising, you can use archetypal images to attract a lot of attention and to get people to become very emotional and make choices that they wouldn't otherwise make. Somebody told me the other day about addiction to computer games. And the story was that two people who were dating finally got married, and they got to know each other by playing the same computer game. And after they got married, they sat in the same room playing the same computer game with each other across the table from each other. And I haven't played computer games, but apparently it's a worldwide addiction. And I think the foundation of it must be some kind of have an archetypal basis. It's so attractive. It draws people into a narrative and into a journey that really matters to them. They'll sacrifice almost anything to engage in this type of active imagination. It is very active, it's very imaginative, and they leave their mundane world behind. So Wolfgang Giegerich, the German analyst, has said, well, the collective unconscious is out there in the internet now. That's where you find the archetypes and the myths active and at work. It's all around us. The collective unconscious isn't just in the old myths. It's in our psyches today, and it's in our creative people. You see it in films. There's a lot of very strong archetypal motifs in movies and popular culture and popular entertainment. Question is, where is it taking us? Does it really orient us? Does it help us? Or is it just being used to create more chaos and confusion? I think the individual has to find some kind of point of orientation within all of this that's going on in contemporary life in order to survive, really. I mean, you can get pulled in so many directions, and I think that's the appeal of the religions, the fundamentalist religions and so on. They offer containment, and they offer a narrative, and they offer a direction. They offer basic values. They tell you who you are. They tell you where you're going. They tell you what you should do, who you should vote for, who you should fight. All of that is provided. If you're outside of that, how do you make those decisions? How do you know who to vote for? How do you know what are you going on? So this puts a tremendous burden on the individual to come up with some kind of inner framework for a personal, meaningful life and a sense of containment and orientation. It's a tough job.
That's true, yeah.
It's extremely difficult and demanding. And as you see, the collective forces of fundamentalist religion are growing by leaps and bounds precisely because modernity is so full of chaos and confusion. People are fleeing to these certainties because they need containment, and the religions provide that for them.
We have another question, Suzanne?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. My name is Suzanne. I'm in the depth psychology program the first year, and I have a question about, I understand how myths and the study of ancient myths helps us to understand the unconscious, provides orientation and containment, and it seems the motivation, one of them to study these, are the belief in a soul. And so in modernity, there are a lot of people that do not believe a soul exists. How do we approach them? How do we help them along that path?
Do you want to tackle that, Andreas?
You might have
What
an
is
idea.
the soul? What is the
Yeah,
soul?
what
Does
is
the soul exist?
But I mean, it's a good question, because in fact that's true. That's what we have to deal with often.
Yeah.
And then in analysis, it might take months, or if not to say years, in order to approach the we so easily speak about the numinous experience. But what do we do, as you say, Suzanne, that they have not this feeling for the soul? And I think the only thing we can do is that we try to be as open and as human as possible to share my own soul with the client, to bring them into a relationship that can enliven them. I think that's it's a very human approach. I certainly wouldn't talk about myths, Egyptian myths, because they would say, "Oh, what a fool! I don't. That doesn't tell me anything." So first, we need to make a contact, a warm, a loving contact, or also might be also an emotional contact, and that can take years, until it starts. But if it starts, if then you come to the moment where you address, let's say, God or something numinous, then it is really numinous. Then it is something very, very special.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to hold on to that. Maybe in another one of our video conferences we could really take that up, because modernity does not support the idea of soul at all. You can't find it if you've taken an anatomy class or physiology or something. Where is the soul in that body? We're total materialists. I mean, that's our basic assumption. The material world is it. And to overcome that, one has to have certain types of experiences, and one can't just leap over the problem of what our culture. Our culture is fundamentally materialist and anti-spiritual and anti-soul. Those things just don't exist. And so to affirm them, to find them, to experience them, is not an easy matter. We need to look at that question some more.
That's a wonderful idea, Murray. I really like that question that was asked, as well as that idea of could we go further. That'd be a marvelous seminar that we could maybe put together of what is soul, what does it mean, what are the depths of it. You and I can maybe talk about that soon and see if we can plan something.
Yeah.
A couple of things to wrap up with. One, today was a bit of a unique seminar for us. We broadcasted from a different site in Zurich, mainly to get the slide images to come across. I don't know if you've noticed today, but we had some marvelous Egyptian images that we've never had that many and breadth of images before, and that seemed to work really well. So if you like the format that we had with the split screen, we'll want to hear that from people. Give us some feedback if you would on that. But so far, I think that worked very well. We've got a couple of things on the board for next year. We're going to take a break until probably February of 2011, where we hope to broadcast from the ETH, which was a university near Zurich that Carl Jung himself taught at. And Murray has been in contact with some folks there. We'll be doing some technical testing with it. We'll be looking at the life and work of Carl Jung in light of the Red Book and some of the historical pieces. That should be in February. And we'll send out emails, of course, to give more details about that. And then in April, we're looking at perhaps having London get involved, if we can have that to work out. We'd love to add another presenting site that might co-present with Murray, looking at some clinical material, particularly from his textbook that he just released. And again, we'll get you that information more out as it becomes more concretized with that. And again, check out the website when you get a chance, AshevilleYoungCenter.org. We've got all the prior DVDs available, and we'll have this one up within a few months to make available as well. I'd like to thank Andreas and Murray one last time. I thought they did a marvelous job tonight. It is so good to see such a wonderful presentation in depth. The Egyptian imagery was just fabulous. So thank you again one more time.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
You have a good night, and we will see you later. Bye-bye.